Well, thank you very much. This concludes all 6 of our talks, but now you and I get to put on different hats, right? Me as the host and the co-chair, you as the previous host, and we have about 25 minutes to chit-chat or to look back on these talks. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on what you've heard. And then I want to look forward to like, what are the other on-demand talks, or what do we want to make sure people know about in the Americas live stream or in the APAC live stream? So that's the agenda. Also, Juliet on our team will be popping up banners with useful links as we're talking. Like I know there's a survey link that I really want to make sure people see before they leave. Hopefully you won't leave. You should just stay because Marco's cat might come on by. My dog is asleep. It's the middle of the night in California. But there's the survey link. So you can fill out the survey multiple times, like just now on today's talks and then tomorrow on other talks you might watch. And of course, we want feedback on the whole event and whether you thought Citus Con was useful. The survey closes next Tuesday, April 19th at 11:59 p.m. anywhere on Earth time zone, whatever that means. It means like that way. It means east, west of me. Okay. Let's talk about today. Any thoughts? Any things you want to highlight about the talks from today? I'm going to pull up an executive summary of today's EMEA live stream. It'll take me a minute to find it, so don't wait because these thumbnails are very, very small. Aha! That looks like Magnus's face. Here we go. So here's today's lineup.
Yeah. I mean, definitely a great number of talks. So I mean, it's always great to hear Magnus speak. I'm also looking forward to the in-person Postgres conferences starting up again, especially PGConf EU. I went to it many times. It's a great event. But yeah, it's hard to disagree with with the premise. Like Postgres is definitely more relevant than ever. I mean, that's why we're also having this conference. Citus is also more relevant than ever, but you know, the Postgres ecosystem is becoming so big, and it's I wrote this extension at some point, which is much smaller than Citus. It's called PG cron, and it's just a thing for scheduling jobs in in Postgres, like every minute or at 1 a.m. And then I keep a list of which managed service providers have PG cron installed. And I think there's already like 10 or 12 of them. And so there's all these different Postgres services, and there's a lot of different extensions. Like we've seen talks about PostGIS. But your typical Postgres server now already has like 20 different extensions pre-installed. So the ecosystem is becoming really huge. And then at the core, the Postgres project, it's just the rate at which it keeps moving is just phenomenal. Like every year there's it's like, you get a merge command and you get a merge command. So it's like there's all these new features. Just, I mean, essentially we all get for free as the Postgres users of the world, which is amazing. And of course, there's people like working really hard to make that happen. So people like Magnus, people like Andres and Melanie yesterday, and Bruce. And
Thomas last night while you were asleep.
Thomas last night, yes, I was asleep. I'm definitely going to rewatch that. So yeah, we owe a lot of gratitude to them for continuing to drive this project forward.
There were some choice quotes in Magnus's keynote today, like the one about how did it say something like nobody needs Postgres and yet everything runs on Postgres.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, it's well, I don't know if I guess at this point, if you run your application on Postgres, you definitely need it to keep running. But definitely, yeah, it was interesting, this historical perspective of there's always a lot of alternative databases. But yeah, the thing we also found out the hard way over the past 8 years working on Citus is that it's really hard to build a database. It's really hard. It takes really a lot of time. Postgres is so far ahead because it's so old. Like it has had so much development going in, but not just like development at random, development with inputs from the whole world, from the whole community, with actual practical problems and very good refined solutions to those problems that took many years or many decades to develop. And it just makes Postgres very, very good for a lot of different use cases. So and I mean, you could say, I'm not sure it's inevitable, but inevitably, like, people like it as a database because it's really, really great technology.
Well, I think one of the things I liked about Andy Pavlo's keynote, now he is the professor from Carnegie Mellon University who, I don't have it here. I'll pop it up though. He was the keynote speaker on the APAC live stream. So that's probably not this one. This would be, excuse me, he was America's. So give me one more try. I can't get it wrong this time, right? Because I've only got three tries. There you go. So when Andy was giving his talk, it was about self-driving Postgres. And so you talked about how old Postgres is, and Magnus talked about how it stayed true to its core, that focus on stability and robustness. And yet Postgres is evolving, as is open to change. And the notion or the idea of having a self-driving database someday, I mean, that could be a game changer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess the one thing the one downside of bad thing you could say about Postgres is it's not necessarily very easy to use, right? It's very versatile, so it has so many features, but you need to know how to use all of those features. And when you get into performance, especially, there's extended statistics, there's partial indexes, there's some partitioning, and you need to make a lot of choices around that, and it's not obvious how you make those choices. So like Postgres almost has this like enormous potential within it that if you can automate those decisions and give like all those performance benefits to anyone, I mean that's huge. Because I mean we've seen a few of the large Citus customer like Algolia today, that we're not really talking about their performance, but they've gone through a lot of iteration to optimize their Postgres databases to handle a really challenging data problem on Postgres and Citus, and similar with some of the other Citus customers giving on-demand talks. And they went through all of these, do we need like partial indexes and index-only scans and all these things? But if you could right. If you could make that from like a long engineering exercise into something like the database just learns and does that automatically, that would definitely be game changing.
Well, and I think if we think about Sai's talk, so he was also in the Americas live stream earlier or yesterday for you, I guess. And he was talking about how to select your distribution column in Citus, right? How to select that sharding key, which is a really important decision that a lot of people make early on in defining their data model, right? When they're first adopting, if it's a native application, or when they're migrating to Citus. And it just, makes you kind of think about, will that be automated someday, right? Can that intelligence that currently people end up thinking about, how will it change? Like what's the world going to look like in 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One I think about often, but don't have a great answer to. I mean, there's different paths. Like there's yes. I mean, I see some distributed databases that just like distribute everything by primary key, and I mean it's relatively simple and automatic. But then once you start joining things together, it's like really slow because there's just no, like the relational part isn't there. It's not relating the different pieces of data that it's joining together by putting it on the same node. But then if you in Citus, we make it a very manual choice. You have to like distribute everything manually, so you have to make like a lot of good manual choices, and you can get to that performance, but it's much more difficult to some extent, depending on your application. For many applications, also obvious, but especially for complex application. So there's probably some middle ground there where it's much more automated, and then but to some extent, maybe the database itself also needs to become a little bit different. Like one thing is with distributed databases, it's useful if the query specifies like a filter on the distribution column, for example, because then, oh, the database immediately knows, oh, the data's over there. But if that's not there, the application's not telling it that, then can you magically solve that? Well, maybe that needs to be pulled a little bit more into the application. Maybe the application needs to have some layer in it that actually gives some hints to the database, for example, about what it actually wants to do. So it's not yet clear, is this something we can solve entirely in the database, or is it something that we need to kind of take a slightly more holistic view and include like parts of the application essentially in this automation process?
So I think anybody listening can tell that you've thought a lot about database architectures and implementations and the trade-offs, because there's trade-offs in everything, right? So
Yes.
I'm sure you talked about releasing 3 versions of Citus a year, 1 major, 2 minor, and each one of those is chock full of those design trade-offs. So before we cut to a video, because we've got a couple of roles that give little snippets of the on-demand talks that have already been produced, is there anything else that you want to highlight from the other live streams that just comes to mind? I mean, it's kind of not fair because we really want to talk about every single one of them, right? But we only have 14 minutes left. So
yeah, I must say I felt a bit embarrassed during Haki's talk that I didn't know most of the things that he was showing. I mean, I definitely knew the dollar quoting, but there were some really, really neat tricks in there that I hadn't realized myself about how you could do the copy in PSQL, or the upsert trick where you ask the database how was this inserted or upserted. Those are some really cool tricks.
I think that Nils on your team commented on the Discord that not a day in his life goes by when he doesn't use the dollar quoting feature. It's just so handy. And it saves him time. And I'm sure that's something that Nils cares about, right? Nobody wants to be inefficient.
Yeah, it's especially handy for also functions where the argument of the function is sometimes a query, and it's so much easier. Like if you try to put a SQL query in quotes, then you have to like double quote, like escape the escaped quotes. It gets very, very nasty. So it's definitely a great thing to know about.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should roll a video. And since your talk was about Citus and looking at the Ellicorn's horn, let's roll the Citus video first.
With the single node Citus, we have partitions. We have sharded our partitions. And if you want to scale out those, let's say the sharded partitions, you can basically add nodes to your cluster. And after adding nodes, you can basically run the rebalance table shards commands to rebalance your sharded partitions on the, let's say, the multi-node Citus cluster.
I'm going to start by just talking about the basics, single row inserts versus copy, and for that matter, upserts, which are a wonderful Postgres pattern that should be used more often. I'm going to go from there into micro-batched and parallelized copy operations. And from there, we'll get into more difficult techniques. There's one I invented that I call index juggling that's worked out pretty well for me.
I'm going to break down each stage of our journey from 0 to 1 million events, from 1 to 100 million events, and then to billions of events. And for each stage, I'm distilling our learnings into lessons that you'll walk away with for you to use in your journey from choosing a database technology to scaling it up.
My name is Matt Dupree, and I'm going to be giving a talk on some lessons that we've learned from optimizing Citus queries at Heap. So quick disclaimer and a little bit about me. So I've been at Heap for a couple of years, and when I first started doing performance work, it was actually a little bit intimidating. People were using terms like pushdowns and shard sampling.
Not to meet you virtually. I'm Ming Wei, and I work in the Windows data engineering group. When I started off, I realized that Citus has a great distributed SQL query execution engine, right? From a few examples, as you can see, from the data engineer point of view, this is just normal SQL, right? So this is actually very powerful. A big data researcher and developer at the MobilityDB team. MobilityDB is a spatiotemporal database system developed by a research team in the Free University of Brussels in Belgium. And this is my talk about how it integrates with Citus to support big spatiotemporal data that it changes over time.
Hello, everyone. Today I will be talking about following select statements through Citus internals. And in fact, what does it mean that what we will look into what happens under the hood when a user comes in and types a select query. And then we will, while doing that, we will also have an opportunity to discuss some basic architectural diagrams of Citus.
Pretty
Awesome.
cool, huh?
Yes. I didn't see all of them yet, but I think I'm just going to watch all of them.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to. Min Wei's story is really interesting. So he works at Microsoft, but even before we were part of Microsoft, right? We were a separate company, a startup. He adopted Citus and Postgres together on Azure, and he runs this massive petabyte scale system. But the thing I find really interesting, because here we are at a conference, people are giving all these talks, and the way he discovered Citus is he was driving home from work. He'd been researching all sorts of different databases and technologies to solve his problem with scale. And as he was driving home, he just kind of put his phone on some conference. I think it was .scale in Paris from, let's see if I can get this, 2017. That was the year you gave this talk. And he just listened to it on YouTube. And it was your talk, and it was all about Citus and distributed Postgres. And that's why he started prototyping and experimenting and realized that, hey, this was going to solve his problems. Pretty darn cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. And yeah, I think also for him, it really comes down to, well, okay, Citus provides this handy layer of combining a bunch of servers, but then the number of performance features you have then in Postgres that you can just use with these distributed tables as well. That's really what made it work for him, because like basically his team collects the data from Windows devices, when there's a crash or just when you've got telemetry that's being sent to Microsoft for analyzing, for example, new Windows releases. Like if a new Windows release goes out, are there certain devices, like Microsoft cannot test on every device in the world, so it will do these controlled rollouts and see, oh, actually something went wrong on this particular type of device. Things got slower, you got more errors. So they collect all that data and they give, there's a lot of people looking at this dashboard, like engineers, product managers. And so that's a lot of queries per second, but it's a huge amount of data. And so by combining this distributed SQL with actually, indexes, partitioning, all of the Postgres performance features that you get, he was able to tackle this on almost like with a very small team and a relatively limited budget to some extent. I mean, it's a more large cluster, but still, if you consider what it's doing, it's not that big in the end.
All right, so given the time we have left, I really want everybody here to see some of these other snippets of the other on-demand talks. I think the one we should roll next, I'm not going to say the name because the second I say the name, the video's turning on and I'll be cut off. But because Magnus was our keynote speaker, he works in the Postgres community. Let's go ahead and roll the Postgres video.
I am the co-founder and CTO of OtterTune, which is a database tuning startup. Prior to this, I was a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon, and I graduated in February 2021. And during that time, I worked on knob tuning, and I also worked that entire time on Postgres as well.
I'm Francesco Tisiot, developer advocate at Ivan. And today, we together are going to understand how we can fix our strings. And, I wanted to give you an example of why we should fix strings, and I didn't have to go that far.
CyclePG is the most used and advanced Postgres driver for Python. It implements the Python DB API 2.0 and it's distributed under the LGPL license. The library was released more than 20 years ago.
And I am here today to talk to you about a talk titled No Array of Sunshine, a data quality focused tour of data types. And what I want you to know is, and this is the big takeaway, is that this is a talk about how choices we make around data types can impact data quality.
I'm going to be talking about integer to big conversions. It's an advanced data talk for Postgres. And I've got a bunch of material that we're going to have to cover in a relatively short time. So I do want to just jump right on into it. And hopefully it'll be both educational and a little bit of therapy for those of you who've had to deal with this. And maybe even before you get to that point, this will have some tips that'll help you out.
If I wanted to just kind of get a high-level view of the whole query, particularly if I had many databases, I would have to sum all of that information up, aggregate it every time I wanted like that high-level view. If I do that at creation time, I can store one row per snapshot and then store the detailed information separately if I want to dig in.
Welcome to this talk about optimizing autovacuum. I've been working with Postgres for about a decade now, in different roles, doing different things with it. As an extension developer for the Citus extension, I worked on working with a lot of customers who've been using Postgres and Citus and are having performance and scalability issues, talking to them, helping them get the best out of Postgres.
Okay, I don't even know where to begin.
We can begin at the end. So Samay's talk, I think, is definitely worth watching. I haven't watched it yet. I haven't had the chance between all the live sessions, but
I've watched it.
How is it? I mean, it must be great.
It is. And part of it is he just knows the topic so well, and he delivers it kind of calmly and clearly. It's really well structured. He's been working on Postgres ever since he got out of college, and he has just built up all this expertise over the years. So and he's also worked both on the engineering side, but also directly with customers. So he kind of feels their pain as well. And so he shares all the tips and all the lessons that he's learned.
Yeah. And I mean, it's definitely a talk for more when you're already in production, not when you're getting started with Postgres. But definitely, it's if you're running Postgres in production today, it's probably a good idea to watch Samay talk about how to optimize autovacuum, because it's a very important topic for running Postgres.
Okay, we've got one more video and we only have a couple minutes. I have really appreciated you being part of this whole event. Thank you. And we are going to run the video, but first, in case we get cut off, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers, all the organizers, and everybody in the community who supported the idea, right? And who helped retweet and amplify and make sure people discovered it. So hopefully these learnings will help a lot of people, and people who are just entering the field right now. Maybe I call them newbies sometimes. Maybe I'm a newbie myself sometimes, but the more assets we have that help people learn, I just think the more we can grow and scale. So Marco?
And of course, thank you, Claire, for creating the idea of Citus Con and co-chairing it and organizing it. I know you've been awake for a very long time.
I have been.
So thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, we're going to run one more video. This has been a pleasure. I've had so much fun. My co-chair, Teresa Giacomini, is probably watching me right now. So, hey, Teresa, thank you as well. Let's roll this last video, and then it's a wrap. Okay?
And behind me, you see a fish. Bash fish is a symbol of our team. The Postgres team within Microsoft is called Orcus. So that is that fish sitting behind me. And in this session, we will go over top 10 reasons why you should choose flexible server over our existing offering, which we call single server.
Welcome to Handle Azure Postgres Auditing with Ease. I am Josephine Bush. I have a lot of DB experience. I started SQL Server, and in the last few years, I've switched over. Well, I actually do both SQL Server and Postgres now in Azure.
So what does this actually mean in numbers? Interestingly, we have with PostgreSQL, on that PostgreSQL database, basically, we analyzed 2.7 trillion of impressions from advertisements on the internet. Each month, we add 70 million of rows of data to our PostgreSQL database.
You need to pay attention to some very important points. The data types, type of index, most important operation in most main operation. This information gives you the basis for the correct choice for the following information.
Hi everyone, my name is Samay Sharma and I will be walking you through the journey I had while creating monitoring tools for Citus on Azure. In this talk, I will briefly explain what the most important metrics are to babysit your Postgres database and why we should keep an eye on them.